We come bearing greetings to the Emperor, dispatched under the Khan's personal order, and we bring news. Shiliang, after years of resistance against Beatty's campaigns, has finally chosen to surrender. From this day forward, Murong Hao answers to the Khan. With every official assembled and standing in place, the Beatty envoy gave a shallow, unhurried inclination of his head, a deliberate slight, falling far short of a proper bow. His name was Taimuda, and no one in this hall yet knew who he truly was. Mule Hongjin's eldest son, commander of the Serious Tent, the Khanate's own personal guard. He had volunteered for this mission himself, driven by two motives. The first was to build the kind of prestige that would strengthen his position when the day came to compete for the title of Khan. The second was simpler. He wanted to see the great song with his own eyes, to measure it directly rather than through the reports of others. The journey had given him much to measure. Passing through Yinzhou first, he'd found a land that looked exhausted on the surface. Poor, beaten down, bearing the marks of recent upheaval. But something else had caught his attention beneath all of that, something harder to name. The people there carried a quality he hadn't expected. Not the blank endurance of a population ground into submission, but something more like stubbornness, the particular persistence of green growth pushing up through scorched earth. Leaving Yinzhou behind and moving south, the landscape changed. The land grew richer with every li. But the people and officials inhabiting that prosperity had settled into it like men sinking into warm water, comfortable and half asleep. By the time he reached Jinling and stood within the great imperial city, genuinely magnificent, genuinely staggering in its scale, what struck him most was how deeply its inhabitants had stopped paying attention. Even the city guards slouched against the gatehouse walls, their interrogation duties apparently forgotten. None of that was possible in Beatty. Beatty's strength rested precisely on the fact that no one there could afford to stop paying attention. Watching all of it, Taimuda had felt his ambitions expand like a vine given new ground to climb. The great song was not what it had once been. The only real obstacle between Beatty and everything south of Yingguan was a single man, King Yin. Remove him, and the rest would fold like paper. Which was, of course, why he was standing here, on the dragon throne. Zhao Heng sat very straight, a deliberate effort to project imperial authority, even as his chest tightened. He'd learned the envoy's purpose from the Honglu Temple officials the previous night, and hearing it again now, before the full court, did nothing to settle his nerves. Taimuda had timed the announcement perfectly. He'd wanted the ministers to hear it, and they had. The hall went absolutely silent, and then erupted. Is this actually true? Han Jing turned to Do Wei with barely concealed panic. Qizhou sat adjacent to Yinzhou, which meant it sat adjacent to everything that would follow if Beatty pushed south. He was sweating through his robes. Do Wei gave a small nod. Zhao Heng had told him the night before. Han Jing's face went white. Shiliang was already giving the great song no shortage of trouble. Someone else said, voice tight with dread. Now Beatty has absorbed them. This is a tiger that's grown wings. If Beatty can bring their full strength to bear on us alone, what then? The three-way balance is gone. 2 against 1. What were we supposed to do? The wave of alarm rolled through the hall, visible and uncontained. Taimuda watched it all from where he stood and felt a quiet satisfaction settle in. His father had read this court correctly. The fear alone might accomplish the mission without a single soldier being deployed. A rabble of rats. Yang Feng's voice cracked across the hall like a whip. So, what if Shiliang surrendered? Are we going to hand over the great song because we're afraid of Beatty? King Yin just held Yingguan and drove Beatty back. He raised the dynasties standing before the whole realm. And now you stand here, shaking your boots? It's contemptible. Your Majesty, war between Beatty and the great song is coming regardless, Mo Quan said, stepping forward. Better to face it on our terms than theirs. Taimuda's eyes moved to the two men. He filed them away. Zhao Heng pressed his fingers to his forehead. A sleepless night, and now this. The fear of what Shiliang's surrender meant, and the rage of being put in this position by Beatty twisted together in his chest until he could barely sit still. He looked at Taimuta. This is a matter between Beatty and Shiliang. What business does it give you in Jinling? Say plainly what you've come for. The Khan has no wish to see two peoples go to war and waste lives on both sides, Taimuta said, his tone carrying no warmth whatsoever. Hand over King Yin to Beatty as a hostage, and the two nations live in peace. Refuse, and Beatty launches a full-scale war. Outrageous! Ma Yuan thrust a finger toward Taimuta. King Yin is a prince of the great song. Hand him over as a hostage? Never. He turned sharply to Zhao Hong. Your Majesty, this envoy's conduct is beyond the pale. Drive them out of Jinling. He looked around the hall, hoping to find the minister's indignation matching his own. What he found instead gave him a chill that started at the soles of his feet. Most of them were quiet, not with outrage, but with calculation. Weighing, considering. He looked at Zhao Hong again, and found the emperor's face not angry at all. Undecided. Taimuta watched Zhao Heng's expression carefully and pressed the opening. Furthermore, Beatty is prepared to offer 80,000 warhorses in exchange. That landed in the hall like a stone in still water. Your Majesty, Han Jing said, in the careful, almost delicate way he said it made Ma Yuan's blood run cold. There's a certain logic in becoming a hostage in an enemy country. It has precedent in diplomatic history. Han Jing had his own quiet arithmetic running beneath the words. Of all the great clans, his Han family had the most to fear from Beatty pressing south. Chizhou's exposure was too direct. But if King Yin went to Beatty as a hostage, that changed the calculation entirely. He could petition the emperor to grant the second prince Yinzhou in his place. King Yan's soldiers, his weapons, his wealth, his land, all of it would pass to the Han family's sphere of influence, effectively, without a single battle fought. A tidy solution to two problems at once. Shameless. Mian's face had gone crimson. Does a minister of the great song truly speak like this? Your Majesty, Beatty doesn't keep its word. Once King Yin arrives there, he won't last a season. And consider why they want him in the first place. Because they fear him. They're using Shiliang's surrender to frighten us into doing what their army couldn't. The moment King Yin is gone, the four northern counties fall into chaos. And that chaos is exactly the opening Beatty needs. We'd be handing them the war they couldn't win. Zhao Hong kept his head bent, turning it over. Han Jing's proposal had tugged at something in him. If Beatty could be satisfied, if the country could have peace, what was one prince against all of that? He'd spent his whole reign managing these competing pressures. The calculation wasn't unfamiliar. But Mian's words pulled the other way and held. King Yin was not a prince who could simply be escorted out of Yinzhou by a company of imperial guards. He was a real power. Territory, army, demonstrated victory. Move against him the way you'd move against a court prince, and you'd have a civil war on your hands before the ink was dry on any agreement. And if Beatty truly feared King Yin enough to come all this way with this demand, then King Yin still standing in Yingguan might be the single thing keeping Beatty from marching. King Yin is a prince of the great song, Zhao Hong said at last, his voice steadying. I will not hand him to you as a hostage. If that is all you came here to ask, then you have your answer. Go back. Taimuta let a slow smile cross his face. Emperor of the great song, think carefully. When I return to the grassland, Beatty's army will come down on your rivers and mountains like a flood. He turned to leave. Wait. Do Wei's voice cut through the hall. He turned to face Zhao Hong and bowed. Your Majesty, if what concerns you is King Yan's potential for trouble, there is a simpler path. Summon him to the capital on the pretext of family visit. Once he is here, the imperial army takes him quietly. Why risk the great song's foundations over one prince? Zhao Heng's resolve wavered again, visibly. Do Wei continued before the silence could harden. As for his soldiers, strip a man of his commander, and you strip an army of its nerve. Chaos would follow naturally. The court offers titles and generous pay to those who submit, and the problem resolves itself without a fight. For Do Wei, this calculation was genuine, not merely cynical maneuvering. He had no confidence in an all-out war with Beatty. None of the great clans did. The frontier had been a slow, grinding loss for years. An organized Beatty push, with Shiliang absorbed and their flank secured, was a different scale of threat entirely. If surrendering King Yin bought real peace, that outcome served the great clan's interests better than any battle would. And the 4 northern counties, once cleared of King Yan's influence, would fall to whatever arrangement the court devised next, almost certainly one more amenable to their collective interests. Second, the Prime Minister. Wang Xian, Fan Xingluan, and others stepped forward in succession. Across the hall, the 6th Prince, released from the heavenly prison once the Yuan family's rebellion charge had collapsed, could barely contain himself. "Father," he said, stepping forward, "your son would gladly go to Yinzhou in King Yan's place." Ma Yuan, Yang Feng, Mo Quan, and Mi Yin looked ready to shake apart with fury. The great clans had always favored tribute and accommodation over confrontation. They'd pushed for it before, and they'd push for it now. That much was expected. What none of them had anticipated was how openly, how quickly, so many voices would line up behind it with King Yan's life on the table. Taimuta's laughter filled the hall. "It seems the ministers of the great song have made the sensible choice. In that case, surrender King Yin to us directly, and Beatty withdraws." Zhao Hong was very nearly there. He thought the same way these ministers did. When it came down to it, peace was worth almost any price, so long as the throne survived it. He opened his mouth. "Your Majesty." Liang Kai's voice came in just ahead of whatever Zhao Hong had been about to say. "Think twice. If King Yin can hold Yingguan once, he can hold it again. And those cannons of his, Beatty has never been able to answer them. With a weapon like that in hand, the northern frontier is defensible. Is it wise to give all of that up?" He caught Do Wei's eye as he finished and gave a small, deliberate look. Do Wei stopped. In the surge of panic, he'd let himself forget. He turned the situation over again now. Quickly. Liang Kai was right. If King Yin died, and his cannon-casting secrets died with him, the great clans would lose the leverage they'd been building toward. They'd been moving to pry that technology loose from him for weeks. Handing him to Beatty now threw all of that away. "Your Majesty, forgive me, I spoke too hastily." Do Wei recovered smoothly. "We need not hand King Yin over at all, but we must insist he sends artillery to the capital immediately. If the Great Song's armies can be equipped with cannon, we can meet Beatty on equal terms. There is no need to negotiate from a position of fear." Han Jing absorbed this shift, and after a moment, nodded. The cannon question was the real prize. Yinzhou's future could be settled later. There would be other opportunities. The 6th Prince looked down at the floor and said nothing. Ma Yuan, Yang Feng, and the others finally exhaled. None of them had expected what actually saved King Yin from that hall. Not loyalty, not righteousness, not the force of argument. A piece of military technology, sitting in a workshop in Yinxing, had done more for him in the last 60 seconds than every allied voice in the room combined. Those words speak directly to what I was thinking. Zhao Heng's brow smoothed, something like relief working its way into his expression. He'd let himself forget for a moment. Panic had a way of narrowing a man's thinking, and Liang Kai had reminded him of what was actually sitting in Yinzhou. With the great clans themselves now shifting their position, his confidence steadied. "My decision stands," he said. "There is nothing further to discuss." Across the hall, Taimuta's jaw tightened. The word cannon had landed on him like a blow. He scanned the assembled ministers and found them nodding along with Liang Kai, falling back into line one by one. The threat had failed to hold. "Then we are at war," he said without heat. "We will see each other again." He turned and walked out of the hall. Zhao Hong felt the cold of those words settle in his chest. Everything now depended on King Yan's artillery holding the line. If it couldn't, if Beatty pushed through regardless, there would be nothing left to do but reconsider. After all, it would come down to the safety of tens of thousands of Great Song lives. He raised his hand and signaled Liang Cheng to dismiss the court. Before the ministers had fully dispersed, Liang Kai spoke again. "Your Majesty, with Beatty threatening our borders, I would urge that King Yin not be granted maritime trade rights after all. Pirates harassing the northern coastline on top of everything else would only compound our difficulties. Minister Liang is exactly right, Do Wei said, raising his voice in agreement. Han Jing, Wang Ziyan, and the others added their voices in turn. Zhao Heng frowned. King Yin requested those rights directly. If I refuse, what reason does he have to cooperate and send artillery willingly? Liang Kai's expression relaxed into something almost cheerful. Your Majesty, allow this minister to be candid. The Liang family recently acquired the method for casting cannon of our own. What? Zhao Heng nearly came out of his seat. He caught himself and forced his expression flat, but inwardly, the cold fury had already set in. Recently? If it was recently, it had almost certainly been far longer than that. These great clans have been sitting on this, feeding him exactly what they chose to feed him, while he'd been kept deliberately in the dark. Liang Kai pressed on, apparently unbothered by Zhao Heng's momentary reaction. Now that King Yin knows the Liang family possesses artillery of our own, he won't be able to keep his cannon locked away like a private treasure. We approach him plainly, hand over his casting methods, and will instruct merchants across every province to stop blocking his commercial interests. With King Yan's intelligence, he'll understand the offer and accept it. Zhao Heng's eyes narrowed as he turned this over. Not minutes ago, he'd been on the edge of sending King Yin to Beatty as a hostage to buy peace. And now the same man had just become an essential strategic asset, someone to be managed and kept in place rather than discarded. The swing of it was dizzying. He'd spent enough years on that throne to understand the shape of what Liang Kai was doing. The great clans had their own motives here, and those motives had very little to do with the dynasty's welfare and everything to do with closing the gap between themselves and King Yan's weapons advantage. I can block the maritime trade request, Zhao Heng said carefully, but I will not ask King Yin to hand over his casting methods. Beatty's agents are thick on the ground. If those methods leaked through careless hands, Beatty would have cannon of their own within a season, and every advantage King Yin built would be gone. I won't risk that. He let a moment pass before continuing. What I will do is order him not to refuse your purchases. He sends artillery to whomever wishes to buy it at a fair price. As for commercial matters, stop making his business difficult. As your Majesty commands. Liang Kai bowed, and the smile on his face said he was satisfied enough with this outcome. He'd gotten most of what he came for. Maritime trade remained blocked. King Yan's request had gone nowhere. Artillery purchases from Yinzhou were now open, which meant the Liang family would be among the first in line. The casting methods themselves had been denied, but Liang Kai had never truly expected to pry those loose. King Yin wasn't going to hand that over under any circumstances, and everyone in the hall knew it. Commercial pressure on King Yan's business operations was to ease, though in practice, that had always been a lever the clans could pick up or set down as it suited them. On balance, a good morning's work. Zhao Heng looked exhausted. He waved his hand, and the court dispersed. Yinqing, the Armaments Bureau. Zhao Su stood with Wang Ying, talking through the next production run. The memorial to the capital had been sent, and since he'd committed to supplying artillery to the throne, there was no backing out of it now. Delivering on that promise was simply a matter of which artillery he delivered. Different from ours? Wang Ying asked, confirming what he'd just heard. Different from ours, Zhao Su said, a quiet smile at the corner of his mouth. Wang Ying looked puzzled. How do you make it different? White iron castings and gray iron castings. Around them, the floor of the bureau hummed with work. Craftsmen moving or others working the bellows, hot air roaring steadily into the blast furnace. As Zhao Su walked Wang Ying through the production logic, the older man grew increasingly lost, his expression tipping from concentration into something closer to quiet embarrassment. This is what's meant by knowing the what without knowing the why, Zhao Su said. Wang Ying had the grace to look chagrined. Before he'd come to work under King Yin, he'd been quietly proud of his technical knowledge. There wasn't much in the craft world he'd believed that he couldn't get his hand around. Standing in front of this man, he felt like an apprentice who'd just discovered how much he didn't know. Your Highness's instruction is invaluable. I'll listen more carefully, Wang Ying said. Beside them, Wang Chong smothered a grin at the sight of his father humbled. Wang Ying caught it and shot him a look. Oh, and do you understand the difference between white iron and gray iron castings? Not all, Wang Chong admitted cheerfully. Zhao Su smiled at them both. Things had settled into a rhythm now. Lu Fu ran civil affairs. The commander held the military. That left Zhao Su freer than he'd been in months to turn his attention back to the Armaments Bureau, where his real advantage actually lived. The technical knowledge he carried in his head wasn't something that could be seized or taxed or restricted by court decree. It was his truest asset, and everything the Bureau produced was its expression. The cross-section of iron has two colors, he said. One is a bright, silvery white. The other is a dull gray. The question is which carbon structure forms when the iron cools, and that depends almost entirely on temperature during smelting and the silicon content of the melt. He laid out the core of it. Gray iron formed when silicon content in the molten metal exceeded roughly 4%. Below that threshold, you got white iron. The difference in behavior between the two was dramatic. Gray iron was tough and resilient, exactly what a cannon needed to withstand repeated firing. White iron was hard, but brittle in the way that mattered most. Under sudden shock, it cracked. It wouldn't merely fail. It would fail catastrophically, turning the weapon itself into a hazard for whoever was firing it. The temperature of the blast furnace determined which outcome you got. Drive the heat above roughly 1,500 degrees, and the silicon in the raw material dissolved properly into the melt, changing how carbon crystallized as the iron solidified. Drop below that threshold, and the silicon stayed bound in compounds rather than free in solution, and white iron was what cooled out at the end. This was precisely why he had no fear of the great clans reverse engineering what they received. Even if their craftsmen managed to imitate the shape and dimensions of his cannon perfectly, they wouldn't know why their results kept coming out wrong. The difference between a gun that fired reliably and one that exploded on its third use lived inside chemistry. They had no framework to diagnose. Yinzhou's smelting had advanced well past what anyone else in the Great Song could currently replicate. Even the low-end white iron castings coming out of his bureau were better than what outside foundries could achieve trying to match them. The other piece he kept to himself, for now, was boring, the technique of drilling and finishing the inner barrel after casting. An unfinished bore left the interior surface slightly uneven, invisible to the eye, but enough to slow a projectile on its way out and cut effective range considerably. His current steel guns ran to about 1,500 meters of effective killing range with granular powder behind them, 2,000 at maximum. Proper boring could push those numbers dramatically higher. But boring required both power. A water-driven boring mill was straightforward enough, and tooling. Specialized drill bits capable of cutting through hardened metal without dulling or shattering. In the 19th century, high-carbon tool steel had solved that problem. It was essentially using harder steel to cut softer steel. He could produce a small batch of high-carbon steel purpose-refined for tooling without much difficulty. It didn't need to be perfect, just hard enough. A few worn-out bits along the way was an acceptable cost. So, simply don't run the hot blast stove during that production run. Wang Ying asked, still trying to get his footing. Exactly that, Zhao Su said. But why? Silicon content. Temperature. The furnace chemistry does the rest. He let that sit without elaborating further. Wang Ying and Wang Chong both looked as though something small was scratching at the inside of their skulls, demanding to get out, and they couldn't quite reach it. They'd accepted long ago that King Yan's knowledge came from somewhere none of them could follow. What they felt wasn't frustration anymore. It was something closer to hunger. They wanted to know what he knew, not just execute the steps he laid out. Master Wang, the cannon run is yours, Zhao Su said, then turned to Wang Chong. As for you, this king has a different task. He took a set of schematics from Su Lai and spread them on the table. Truly, Your Highness. Wang Chong's energy came back in an instant. The two of them moved to the small private courtyard Wang Chong had claimed for himself within the Armaments Bureau. Zhao Su spread the schematics across the stone table. Beyond artillery, this king intends to develop these. He tapped the drawings. The principle is similar to cannon, but on a scale a single soldier can carry and fire. The drawing showed a flintlock musket, rendered in Zhao Su's own hand, with the firing mechanism diagrammed in careful detail. Wang Chong stared at the page and said nothing for a long moment. Even as a drawing on paper, the thing had a quality to it, a completeness, a purposefulness that made it feel almost alive. He could already see, in his mind's eye, what would look like finished and in a soldier's hands. Will your subordinate truly be responsible for building this? His voice came out slightly higher than intended. He'd spent his time at the bureau until now completing sub-assemblies, handling components. Useful work, but none of it fully his own. This would be different. Zhao Su shook his head. Not the whole thing. This firearm involves too many distinct crafts working in sequence. What I'm giving you is one part, the firing mechanism. Wang Chong's excitement deflated visibly. Your Highness, I want to build the whole thing myself. He looked up from the drawings with undisguised hope. Zhao Su shook his head again. It isn't that this king doubts your ability. It's that no one person can do this alone. Not yet. He thought of something a future age would understand immediately. The principle behind a weapon of fearsome complexity could be published openly, available to anyone who cared to read it, and still, only a handful of nations in the world could actually produce one. Between knowing the principle and building the thing lay an entire industrial system, accumulated across generations. The great song in this era was almost purely agricultural. Its industrial foundation, by any honest reckoning, was close to nothing. Before the Armaments Bureau could make cannon, Zhao Su had first needed to solve iron and steel production. Before that, the crucible and the furnace. Each step built the next. The musket was the same problem compounded further. Barrel, firing mechanism, flint, spring assembly, every component demanding its own specialized process, its own trained hand. In Europe, the flintlock had first appeared in 1547, but it had appeared there because a flourishing precision craft industry already existed. Clockmakers, springsmiths, fine metalworkers who could produce the tight tolerances the mechanism required. Yinzhou was building toward that foundation, but it wasn't there yet. The barrel was one problem. He intended to drill it directly from cast iron rather than cast it to final shape, which would solve both the burst risk of an uneven casting and the weak range of an unfinished bore. But drilling required a hydraulically powered boring mill, which had to be built first. The firing mechanism was another problem entirely. At its heart was a spring-loaded wheel structure, the flint gripped in the jaw of the cock, the trigger releasing it to fall and strike sparks against the steel frizzen, the sparks dropping into the pan and igniting the charge. Simple in concept, maddening in execution, because the spring had to be made from spring steel, which wasn't what you got from the standard smelting process. It required a separate refinement run, a specific carbon content, a quench and temper sequence that only worked if every step before it had been done correctly. The flint itself, at least, was simple. The fire steels that ordinary people use for starting fires worked on exactly the same principle, and good flint could be pulled from riverbeds across the province without any processing at all. All of this was why Wang Chong was getting the firing mechanism, and only the firing mechanism. It was enough to keep a talented craftsman fully occupied, and doing it well was the prerequisite for everything else. Your Highness still doesn't trust me, Wang Chong said, the pout in his voice only partially suppressed. Zhao Su remembered, then, what Wang Ying had mentioned, that Wang Chong had grown a little complacent on the back of his recent successes. He let a small smile cross his face. Then prove it. Build the firing mechanism first. Do that well, and this king will reconsider. Yes, Your Highness. The pout vanished entirely. Zhao Su left him to the drawings and walked back toward the palace. At the palace gate, a carriage waited in the courtyard, hung with bead curtains, red inner drapes, unmistakably a woman's conveyance. Zhao Su went inside, puzzled, and found Su standing in the middle of the yard, watching him approach with a smile that held something else beneath it, something close to reluctance. Miss Su. He bowed his head in greeting. He'd been meaning to come to Tiangxianglu for weeks, ever since Fenger told him how Su Yi and her people had held the East Gate during the siege. The gratitude was real. He simply hadn't found the moment. Your Highness. Su Yi returned the courtesy, her posture careful and correct. The warmth was there, but further away than he remembered. Your Highness, my household has received orders from the capital. I've come to say farewell. Zhao Su went still for a moment. Miss Su is leaving? She nodded. Tang Xianglu came to Yinzhou for a purpose, to stand alongside your Highness against the Yuan family. The Yuan family has now taken heavy losses and is no longer a threat your Highness cannot manage. With that task complete, there is no longer a reason for us to remain here. He looked at her for a moment and felt, quietly, the particular weight of watching someone leave whom you hadn't fully appreciated while they were still there. She'd helped hold his city during the worst days of the siege. She'd done it without being asked. He meant to say something about that, properly, and hadn't. Before you go, he said, can you at last tell me who Tang Xianglu truly belongs to? Su Yi's expression shifted, and for a moment, amusement won out over everything else. That is, in fact, the other reason I came. The owner of Tang Xianglu is someone your Highness already knows. An old acquaintance, in fact. An old acquaintance? She let the pause sit for exactly as long as it needed to. Does your Highness remember Princess Changle? The name stopped him completely. Princess Changle, born Yin Yujiao, adopted by Prince Chun and renamed Zhao Yujiao. Her father, Nian Heng, had been a rare thing in the Great Song, a man of genuinely poor origins who'd risen to Minister of War on nothing but talent, earning Zhao Heng's personal admiration along the way. 5 years ago, before the illness that had taken Zhao Su's mind for a time, Zhao Hong had arranged a betrothal between Zhao Su and Yin Yujiao on an impulse, reasoning that a prince of his background wouldn't expect to do better, and Nian Heng's daughter had no other prospects of comparable standing. The good years had ended quickly after that. Within a year, Nian Heng had been collectively impeached by the great clans, falsely accused of embezzling hundreds of thousands of taels of military funds. He'd been executed before the summer was out. His wife had followed him within 3 months, grief finishing what the sentence had started. Nian Yujiao, alone and stripped of everything, had been taken in by Princess Chun. When Consort Mi learned of it, she'd quietly dissolved the betrothal. After all, Nian Yujiao was now Zhao Su's cousin in name. The logic of the match no longer held, and no one had objected. I didn't expect it to be her, Zhao Su said slowly. Something moved through him that he couldn't quite name. Surprise, yes, and something else. A woman who'd lost everything to the same court machinery that had spent years trying to grind him down, and who had apparently spent those same years quietly building something with real reach. She must have had considerable help to build what Tang Xianglu has become. Sui didn't answer that directly. Your Highness can trust my household now. Zhao Su nodded, then shook his head slightly. Trust was one thing. The shape of what he was looking at was another. Nian Yujiao alone hadn't built a network spanning the Great Song from scratch. There was architecture here he couldn't yet see. After a moment, Prince Chun is behind this, isn't he? He thought of Prince Chun's visit to Yinqing. The man who'd arrived carrying a military supply list and wearing an expression of absolute guilelessness. He felt a chill move through him that had nothing to do with the season. The water in this dynasty ran far deeper than it looked from any single vantage point. Sui neither confirmed nor denied it. This servant only knows what the princess has shared with me directly. He held her gaze for a moment. Then, if you tell me this much, it means they've accepted that I'll know. Which means they wanted me to know, carefully enough that you won't confirm the rest. He paused. What message did she send? Sui looked at him steadily. The princess said, the emperor's most beloved has always been himself. It was so 20 years ago, it was so 4 years ago, and it will be so in the future. She asks only that your Highness take care of himself. 20 years ago, Zhao Heng's ascension to the throne. 4 years ago, Nian Heng's execution. 2 moments of imperial self-interest. 2 lives reshaped entirely by the same calculus. The pattern she was naming wasn't abstract. He stood with that for a long moment, saying nothing. Sui bowed. Your Highness, my household must go. Safe travels, was all he said. She turned and walked back through the gate. He watched her go, and found himself thinking that whatever warmth had existed between them, it had always been real on both sides, and perhaps exactly as constrained on both sides too. Some things weren't built to survive the distance between what they were and what they could have been. He sent Su Lai after her carriage before she'd gone half a mile, carrying a pair of golden hairpins and a message. Thank you for your loyalty. If you ever need anything, Yinzhou's gates are open to you. When Su Lai returned and reported that she'd smiled, genuinely, fully, at the gift, Zhao Su allowed himself one quiet moment to feel glad before turning back to the problems waiting inside. He spent the next several days turning Princess Changle's words over in his mind, and by the time he'd finished, he already suspected the response to his memorial would disappoint him. 7 days later, word arrived from the capital. It confirmed everything he'd guessed. At the same time, a separate message came from Dongan. The palace study. Zhao Su set Zhao Heng's reply on the desk and let Lu Fu read it. Lu Fu's complaints came immediately. Your Highness, we've gained nothing here. The maritime trade rights are denied, and the commercial pressure from the great clans eases only because we're now obligated to sell them artillery. We traded a real asset for the removal of a restriction they manufactured in the first place. Zhao Su said nothing. His face was tight. He'd already been carrying anger over the Yuan family situation. The creeping suspicion that Zhao Heng had coordinated with the great clans to keep Yuan Li alive and in place specifically to counterbalance him. This reply confirmed the pattern. Maritime trade denied. Artillery sales compelled. The exchange on paper looked balanced. In practice, he came out behind. Lu Fu fell quiet too, reading and rereading the letter. Zhao Su reached for the second letter, the one from Dongan, and tore it open. He read it in silence. Then he read it again. His hand found the desk and came down hard, a single sharp crack. Zhao Heng, you fool. Lu Fu startled badly. He looked toward the door in panic, then back at Zhao Su, dropping his voice to an urgent near whisper. Your Highness, that is a capital offense. Please, lower your voice. Walls have ears. Read it yourself. Zhao Su pushed the letter across him. Lu Fu took it. His face went white, then red, then a queasy, bloodless yellow. He stepped to the study door, opened it, confirmed the corridor was empty, closed it again, and turned back with his jaw set. A fool on the throne and traitors filling the court. If not for the artillery, if not for the pure luck of that one factor, they would have sent your Highness to Beatty in chains. He stopped, his voice cracking. 3 years your Highness suffered, barely holding on through everything. And now that you've finally built something real, this is what they do with it. The anger in him broke fully through. His eyes went red, and then the tears came, not soft grief, but the hot, furious kind. Zhao Su looked at him for a moment, felt the cold that had settled through his own chest, and almost let what was building inside him tip into something irreversible. But Lu Fu, standing there, weeping with rage on his behalf, pulled him back. There was something clarifying about it. He took a breath, and the impulse passed. Ha ha ha. The laugh that came out of him was not what Lu Fu expected. It was large and genuine and ugly, carrying everything at once. The fury, the bitterness, the sheer scale of the disappointment. After a moment, it stopped. I won't rebel, Zhao Su said. And I can't. Not now. Why not? Lu Fu looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. Because that's exactly what Beatty wanted. Think it through. If the court had agreed to send me north, I would have died in Beatty, and with me, any real threat to their southern campaign. If the court refused, and that refusal drove me to raise a banner against the throne, I become the common enemy of both the Great Song and Beatty simultaneously. They'd strangle me from 2 sides at once, and both of them would feel righteous doing it. Zhao Su's voice was calm in a way that hadn't been there a moment ago. Either way, I'm finished. The trap only works if I walk into it. Lu Fu absorbed this, and slowly the shaking in his hands stilled. What was left in Zhao Su's chest after the anger burned through was something that felt almost like clarity. He was done, genuinely, finally done, carrying any expectation of Zhao Hung or the great clans. Whatever remained of that feeling had been ashes before today. Now there weren't even ashes. From this point forward, the only thing that mattered was the land under his feet and the people on it who'd chosen to stand with him. Everything he built, every decision he made, would be for them. When friends came, he'd open the wine. When wolves came, he'd show them what he'd built. "I was reckless, Your Highness," Lu Fu said, after a long silence. He exhaled the last of the heat out of himself and bowed his head. "Forgive me." He'd done the same arithmetic Zhao Su had just laid out and arrived at the same answer. For northern counties, 30,000 veterans, 30,000 trained recruits, the remaining 60,000 still being raised. Nowhere near enough. He'd momentarily forgotten all of it in his anger. Throwing that force against the combined weight of the court, the great clans, and Beatty was exactly what losing looked like. "Stop sighing," Zhao Su said. "From today we build. We take the 4 northern counties and we make them into the strongest, most prosperous territory in the Great Song. When we're strong enough, we won't need to look at anyone's face anymore, and our enemies will lose sleep thinking about ours." Lu Fu looked at him. This king, who was still younger than him, standing in the aftermath of discovering that his own father had nearly handed him to the enemy, and talking about the future with something steady and bright in his eyes. It was, Lu Fu thought, the most dazzling thing he'd ever seen. "As long as I draw breath," Lu Fu said, and bowed deeply, "I am yours." Zhao Su gripped his shoulder and lifted him up. He thought of something he'd always believed. Anger without power behind it was meaningless. A 3-month-old pup showing its teeth only made people laugh. The answer to today wasn't rage. It was what he built next. He turned the conversation to what needed building immediately. First, the 5 bastions currently under construction. Beatty's envoy had failed this time, but failure wouldn't end the matter. When the snow on the Yinshan range melted in spring, Beatty's forces would resume their pressure on the border. Harassment, if not outright assault. The bastions needed to be finished, and faster than the current pace allowed. Second, and this had been taking shape in his mind since the battle at Yingguan, the north wall of the pass itself needed to be redesigned. The straight line of Yingguan's existing wall had revealed its weakness in the fight. It offered fire coverage only directly forward, leaving the flanks exposed and the angles of approach limited. He wanted to build protruding angular sections out from the existing wall at intervals. The same principle as the Star Fort designs he carried in his memory. Bastions that jutted outward from a main line so that defenders could cover the base of the wall in both directions and eliminate the dead ground where ladders and siege equipment had sheltered. More artillery positions, better angles of fire, no blind spots. It was expensive. Everything he needed to do was expensive, which brought him back to the one thing that underpinned all of it, revenue. The 4 northern counties had been Yinzhou's poorest territory before the recent fighting stripped them further. His low-tax policy was the right policy for a people trying to recover, but that same policy meant the treasury filled slowly. Building bastions, refortifying Yingguan, laying down the keels of warships, paying and equipping 120,000 soldiers. None of these numbers were small, and they all needed to be funded simultaneously. The great clan's commercial pressure had eased. Zhao Heng's letter had at least confirmed that much. The imperial merchant designation for the Yin County Trading House was genuine, and the clans wouldn't openly obstruct business they'd been told to leave alone. That was something, but the price of it was artillery. He'd originally designed that trade for maximum return. Low-grade white iron cannon for outside buyers. Higher-grade gray iron cannon to selectively supply the imperial forces, keeping the quality gap as a strategic lever. What he hadn't planned for was being told to hand over artillery not as a transaction, but as a concession, with nothing meaningful coming back in the other direction. And Dong En's letter had confirmed one more thing. The Liang family had artillery of their own. He'd suspected as much since the Shinji camp's firearms had appeared years ago, and knowing the Liang family's maritime reach, it would have been stranger if they hadn't encountered cannon technology somewhere offshore. Now, they'd admitted it openly and positioned their version as a competitor to his own. He dismissed that concern almost before it fully formed. He had no doubt about where the two designs actually stood relative to each other. The Liang family's imitation would be exactly that. What he revised, quietly and without announcing it, was his plan for what the court and the great clans would receive going forward. He'd originally intended to differentiate between gray iron and white iron in his deliveries. Better for the throne, worse for the clans, as a way of strengthening the imperial army at the clan's relative expense. After today, that distinction collapsed. Zhao Heng had made clear where he actually stood. The cheapest cast iron cannon in Yinzhou's production run was all either of them would see. He would save the real weapons for the people who'd actually earned them. Beyond the fortifications, Zhao Su continued, I intend to formally establish 3 schools, a military academy, a government academy, and a school of science and technology. Shiliang had fallen to Beatty. Beatty's strength was growing with every passing season. The Yuan family would keep making moves behind the scenes. And the imperial court and the great clans, as they just demonstrated, would bend to their own interests before anyone else's, including his. He had no reason to assume they wouldn't sell him out again the moment a better deal presented itself. In that environment, the only answer was to build from the ground up in every direction at once. Institutions that could produce their own talent. Talent that would further develop Yinzhou's land and people. A compounding return that no external pressure could simply take away. A government academy? A school of science and technology? Lu Fu's brow creased. Understood the military academy. You've already been running something like one in the North Camp. But the other 2, summon Wang Ying and Chong Wei, Zhao Su said. We'll discuss it together. Lu Fu left and returned shortly with both men. Chong Wei came in first, and had clearly been holding something in since Lu Fu had briefed him on the road. He lasted about 3 seconds after crossing the threshold. Your Highness, this general can't stand it. What they did to you, I swear I could. I know, Zhao Su said simply. Wang Ying followed, and his own words came out with more restraint, but no less feeling. Your Highness, forgive me speaking plainly. The Emperor and the great clans are men who've grown comfortable with what they have. For that comfort, there's very little they won't do. Your Highness should never forget what you've seen today. Zhao Su nodded. Wang Ying was a man of few words, but when he spoke, he usually saw straight to the center of a thing. Rest easy, Zhao Su said. This king is not a fool, and this king has no intention of walking into anything that ends with being cut down. He let the 3 of them find each other's eyes for a moment. You all understand what today means. I don't need to say more about it. A long look passed between the 4 of them, wordless, clear. The Great Song's imperial authority was hollowing out. The great clans circled each other and the throne in equal measure. Beatty pressed from the north with growing weight. If the court had treated them as true partners, they'd have given everything in return. Instead, they just watched the court weigh the option of shipping their lord to the enemy like a diplomatic token. The old Confucian formula settled in the air between them without anyone saying it aloud. A king who treats his ministers as brothers finds ministers who treat him as their heart. A king who treats his ministers as dirt finds ministers who treat him as a stranger. They were the latter category now. No one needed to announce it. Enough, Zhao Su said. That's settled between us. The reason I've called you here is the schools. Each of you will take responsibility for one. Use the large houses near the palace. I purchased them some time ago, and they've been sitting empty. More than enough room. Your Highness, Lu Fu said, what exactly does the government academy teach? The practice of governance, Zhao Su said. I'll compile the specific materials myself. But let me explain the problem it's meant to solve. The Great Song's existing system produced officials who were essentially generalists with no practical training for anything. The examination system tested a man's mastery of the classical texts. It said nothing about his ability to manage a granary, plan a drainage project, assess a harvest, adjudicate a land dispute, or oversee a building program. Officials arrived in their posts having learned the philosophy of governance while knowing nothing of how governance actually functioned on the ground. Most muddled through by leaning on experienced clerks, men who often ran the real work of an office while the official above them collected the formal authority and the salary. In Yinzhou, that wasn't going to be acceptable. He intended to build something more specific. Officials responsible for waterworks would be expected to actually understand waterworks. Officials overseeing construction would be required to understand building. Agricultural officials would need real knowledge of cultivation. The government academy would offer training in each of these areas as formal subjects, with practical materials he'd compile as textbooks. Scholars who passed through the program successfully would be placed directly into official positions. It was, in essence, a professional civil service school, something the Great Song in its current form had never thought to build. Yes, Your Highness. Lu Fu's eyes had taken on a particular brightness. He'd spent long enough watching half-trained officials fumble through their duties to understand exactly what this was worth. He couldn't quite picture yet what the teaching materials would look like, but he already wanted to see them. Chang Wei's expression carried the same anticipation. Whatever King Yin put into these schools was going to look nothing like anything they'd seen before. The changes in the military bureau and the army over the past year had already proven that. Your Highness, Wang Ying said carefully, what exactly does science and technology mean? I follow the technology part, but the science. Science is shorthand for a way of understanding the world, Zhao Su said. Not what things are called, or what the classics say about them, but the actual working principles behind why they behave the way they do. You've made glass, but do you know why the method I gave you produces glass and not something else? Wang Ying shook his head. Learning to understand that, and learning how to investigate it for any material, any process, any phenomenon, that's science. Knowing what to do is craft. Knowing why it works is science. And when you know why it works, you can improve it, adapt it, apply it somewhere else. Wang Ying was quiet for a moment, turning it over. Then, knowing what it is craft. Knowing why it is science. Exactly that. That's a remarkable word for it, Wang Ying said, and the respect in his voice was genuine. The School of Science and Technology would draw students from two sources: craftsmen with practical skills but limited formal learning, and scholars with literacy but no technical experience. Of the two, craftsmen were the better raw material in some respects. They had the hands and the instincts. The problem was that most craftsmen couldn't read, which would slow instruction considerably. The ideal student was someone like Wang Chong, technically curious, practically skilled, and literate enough to engage with written materials. There weren't many Wang Chongs in the world, which made the selection process the most rigorous of the three schools. Unlike the government academy, the Science and Technology School would function more like the Armaments Bureau already did. Students wouldn't be free to come and go at will. The knowledge being taught there was too sensitive and too specific to Yinzhou's strategic advantage to permit casual movement in and out. Once the three of them had their assignments and a clear enough picture of what was expected, Zhao Su sent them off to begin preparations. He retreated to his study and started writing. Over the next several days, he worked steadily through what needed to be committed to paper: military doctrine for Chang Wei's school, practical governance frameworks and subject curricula for Lu Fu's, and the foundations of mathematics, physics, and basic chemistry for Wang Ying's. The knowledge existed in his head in forms no one in this era had encountered before. The challenge was translating it into materials that could actually be taught by instructors who didn't yet share his frame of reference. He was partway through a section on applied mathematics when a secondary problem presented itself and stopped him cold. Any textbook he produced would need to be reproduced, copied out by scholars, and distributed to students. In an age when every book was produced by hand, that took time and money in rough proportion to the length and complexity of the material. It was exactly the reason education had never spread beyond the upper classes in this world. Knowledge was expensive because making books was expensive, and making books was expensive because the only available method was a human hand with a brush. He needed a printing operation. Movable type had existed in the Great Song for generations already. That wasn't the problem. The problem was scale and organization, building a press operation capable of producing the volume he needed at a cost that didn't immediately hollow out the budget before a single student had been taught. He was still turning that over when footsteps came back down the corridor. Lu Fu appeared in the doorway, his expression tight. Your Highness, I have something important to report. What is it? Zhao Su asked without looking up from the page he was writing. This official has received letters from Shui Pan, prefect of Pingjun, and Zhu Rong, prefect of Liaojuan, Lu Fu said. They're claiming to be willing to compel the wealthy families in their counties to hand over their land. Zhao Su set his brush down. A dog that stops eating filth, he said flatly. Something is very wrong. This official thinks the same. Lu Fu's frown deepened. But I can't work out what they're actually after. He paused, then continued. My inclination is to go to Pingjun and Liaojuan in person. If the surrender is genuine, I'll take custody of the land and move on. If there's something else beneath it, being there gives me a better chance of reading the situation than sitting here waiting on the correspondence. Zhao Su's expression turned serious. Be careful. Both Shui Pan and Zhu Rong made the trip to Fanyang to pay their respects to Yuan Li. The Phoenix Guard's capabilities had grown considerably since the early days. Suku had been steadily building out an intelligence network across Yanzhou, placing operatives in county seats and government offices across the region. Fanyang, as Yuan Li's base of operations, received particular attention. Agents recording the movements of visitors to the Yuan estate daily and relaying the information back to Yanqing. That reporting was how Zhao Su already knew about Shui Pan and Zhu Rong's visit. They went to Fanyang. Lu Fu's brow snapped together. Yes, which is why this king suspects Yuan Li's hand is in this somewhere. Even if, like you, I can't yet see the shape of the plan. Lu Fu let out a short, cold sound. All the more reason to go. They've been running passive resistance for weeks. Orders from the palace simply don't move in those two counties. If they're finally showing their hand, even wrapped in a gesture of cooperation, I'd rather be standing there than reading about it afterward. He straightened. I'd sooner walk into this tiger's den than keep watching the government's authority drain away. Zhao Su's thinking ran in exactly the same direction. He urgently needed Pingjun and Liaojuan functioning as genuine parts of his administration rather than nominally subject territories that quietly ignored everything he asked of them. An isolated pair of counties that didn't follow the palace's directives wasn't just inconvenient. It was a drain, a gap in the administrative body of the four northern counties through which everything else could unravel. He wasn't afraid of Shui Pan and Zhu Rong making a move. He was far more concerned about them doing nothing. Passive obstruction, stretching indefinitely, bleeding him in silence. If they were finally exposing themselves, that was an opportunity, not a threat. Take soldiers with you, Zhao Su said. More than you think you need. Just in case. Yes, Your Highness. Lu Fu bowed and left. Pingjun, Pingxing, the Shui family estate. A banquet was in progress in the main hall. Shui Pan sat at the head of the table. The heads of Pingjuan's wealthy families arranged below him in order of standing. After several rounds of wine, conversation had given way to the performance of a troupe the Shui family kept on retainer. Singers moving through the hall to polite, half-attentive applause. When the appropriate moment arrived, one of the assembled officials produced a folded stack of papers from inside his robe and passed it up to Shui Pan. My lord, my family's land deeds. All of them. The others followed in turn, each man drawing out documents and passing them forward without ceremony, as though they'd rehearsed this. Within a short time, a substantial pile of deeds had accumulated in front of Shui Pan. He accepted each one without comment. When the last had been handed over, he drained his cup and looked out at the assembled faces. All of them, he noted, carrying the particular expression of men who had swallowed something bitter and were still waiting to understand what it cost them. You all know, without needing to be told, that these lands were never truly going to remain yours, he said. Look at what happened in Yin County, and then in Shanggu County. King Yin takes the land everywhere he rules. Pingjun was always going to be next. After that, Liaojuan. A collective exhale moved through the room. In truth, the pressure had been building for weeks. Lu Fu had ordered a thorough property survey of Pingjun County, and the families in this room had watched their sons hauled away for violations of the new land registration orders. The resentment ran deep. None of them had the military strength to resist openly, and none had believed they had any other option until Shui Pan had returned from Fanyang, carrying Yuan Li's message. My lord, "We've handed over the deeds," one official said, leaning forward. "At least tell us what comes next." Every face in the room turned toward Shuepan with the same hunger behind it. "Don't ask about that," Shuepan said, his voice dropping to something firm and final. "Just do exactly what I tell you to do when I tell you to do it. The walls in this city are thin, and I won't have anyone lose their head because they couldn't keep a secret." He held the room with his eyes for a moment. Trust the plan. He believed in it fully. He and Zhu Rong both did, enough to stake everything on it. As Yuanli had said, there was no version of the future where King Yin let men like them keep living the way they'd always lived. Their only exit from that future ran through Yin Wang's death. Yinzhou, in that version of events, went back to the Yuan family, and the life they'd known before came back with it. He was prepared to see it through. Jinling, a Beatty envoy, drunk and in a foul mood, sent a young man's wheelbarrow spinning with a kick and followed it with a whip across the man's back, cursing at him for being in the road. The people on the street parted and looked away. No one slowed down. No one said anything. The relief and pride the capital had felt when news of King Yan's victory at Yingguan arrived had been steadily replaced, these past weeks, by something else, a corrosive, simmering fury that had nowhere to go. Since the Beatty envoys had arrived in Jinling, they had made themselves at home in the worst possible sense, eating and drinking at the government's expense, treating the city's residents as obstacles or entertainment as the mood took them, answering to no one. Rumors were circulating that a woman from a respectable family had been driven to throw herself into the river rather than endure what had been done to her. The city magistrates had taken no action. When one citizen, finally unable to watch, had struck a Beatty man in the street, he'd been arrested the same day. The Beatty envoys had gone untouched. The people of Jinling had developed a bitter private joke among themselves. Beatty men were people. Great song men, apparently, were not. Well struck, he had it coming, walking around with no eyes. The voice rang out clear and sharp from the edge of the road, and it did not belong to a man who was afraid of being heard. The speaker was a young man in a blue brocade robe, perhaps 20 years old, who'd stopped his horse and was watching the scene with open disdain, aimed not at the beaten man, but at the Beatty envoy doing the beating. Tayamuda, watching from horseback a short distance away, turned his attention to the young man. He had not, in fact, left for the grassland yet. What he'd seen in the throne room had given him reason to stay. The clear fault lines between the peace faction and the war faction among the Great Song's ministers, the great clan's visible hostility toward King Yin, the emperor's wavering. These things suggested possibilities that a quick departure would waste. Back at the guest compound, he'd put gold into the hands of the Honglu Temple official assigned to manage the Beatty delegation, and through that official had spent the days since assembling a clearer picture of the court's political landscape. He now understood that the great clans and the royal family maintained a mutual distrust that had been running for generations, and that King Yan's recent rise had sharpened that distrust into something close to open tension. The clans hated the idea of a prince holding real military power. The emperor used King Yin as a shield against the clans, but wasn't sure he trusted the shield. He'd concluded that cultivating a relationship with the peace faction among the great clans could be worth considerably more than the original mission had anticipated. A back channel, a point of pressure, a shared interest in keeping King Yin contained. The trouble was that his indirect overtures through the Honglu Temple official had produced nothing. The great clan officials he'd signaled through that channel had gone carefully silent, none of them willing to be seen responding. He had announced his departure publicly, giving himself 3 days. With 1 day remaining, someone had finally decided to move. The young man in the blue brocade robe was Han Exiled, the eldest son of the Han family, one of the 8 great clans. He'd called out his praise of the Beatty envoy's brutality in a voice just loud enough to be heard, held Tayamuda's gaze for exactly 1 deliberate moment, and then turned his horse and rode away without another word. It was the servant walking behind him who did the actual work, passing within arm's reach of a Beatty official in Han Exine's retinue. The servant pressed a folded piece of paper into the man's hand and kept walking without breaking stride. It happened so cleanly that Tayamuda hadn't even caught it until the official leaned close and murmured in his ear. He smiled. Night had settled fully over Jinling. Tayamuda waited in the Honlu Temple guest compound, the imperial guest house maintained for foreign envoys, with the particular patience of a man who has learned that useful things often arrive after midnight. He'd been sitting with this patience for days now. Tonight, it finally paid off. Footsteps approached his door. The Honlu Temple official who'd been on his payroll for the past week stepped in first, then stood aside to admit 7 figures in dark robes. Do Kwang, eldest son of Prime Minister Do. Wang Bai, eldest son of Wang Zian. Han Xian, eldest son of Han Jing. Fan Tong, eldest son of Fan Xingluan. Liang Feng, eldest son of Liang Kai. Xiao He, eldest son of General Xiao Cheng. Xian, eldest son of Xie Duan. Tayamuda's surprise was genuine, and he let himself show it, but only for a moment. 7 of the 8 great clans had sent their eldest sons. Not representatives, not household officials. Sons. The Ma family's absence was notable. 7 of Jinling's 8 great families, all in one room, he said, the warmth in his voice carefully calibrated. The only thing missing is the Ma family. Mahan returned to Qinzhou 2 years ago. He and the rest of us have never. Do Kwang caught himself mid-sentence and didn't finish it. Tayamuda filed the half-sentence away without comment, letting nothing show on his face. The Ma family's distance from the coalition was a useful data point. He kept his expression pleasantly surprised and open. I'm honored, he said, though I wonder, what brings 7 young lords to a foreign guest house in the middle of the night? Don't play games with us, Han Xian said. You're the one who asked to see us. Behind Tayamuda, the Beatty officials in the room tensed. The man they were speaking to was the Khan's eldest son, heir to the greatest power on the steppe, and this great Song noble son was speaking to him as though addressing a street merchant. Tayamuda raised a hand slightly, and the tension behind him eased. He let Han Xian's words pass without any visible irritation. Han Xian, not knowing who he actually was useful. Tayamuda had no intention of correcting that. Let's not quarrel, Wang Bai said smoothly, stepping forward. The Lord Envoy speaks fairly. We're all here because we want to be. He had the manner of a man who'd spent his life watching his father manage difficult rooms and had absorbed the technique. Please, don't mind Han Xian, he's always like this. The fact that all 7 families had sent their eldest sons was itself a statement. This was meant to signal seriousness, not insult. Wang Bai clearly understood that Do Kwang's paper gesture in the street, subtle as it had been, needed to be followed up with something that demonstrated real commitment. Since we're speaking plainly, Tayamuda has said, then I'll speak plainly too. You came because you're willing to deal privately with Beatty. So, what is it you want? And what can you offer in return? Do Kwang answered first. We want trade. War horses, sinew, horn fur. Tayamuda looked at them quietly. He understood exactly what each item was for. War horses spoke for themselves. Sinew and horn were the materials of composite bows. Fur lined the inner layer of armor. These 7 men were sitting in a Beatty guest house at midnight asking, in effect, for war supplies. The question was what they were offering him in exchange, and the answer to that would determine whether this meeting mattered or not. Trade could be arranged, he said carefully, through Jinzhou or by sea. But trade requires goods moving in both directions. What does Beatty get? The 7 exchange a look. Do Kwang tried first. We've already helped you. The Yuan family's rebellion charge. We made sure it didn't stick. The Yuan family stays in Yenzhou, which keeps King Yin contained. That benefits Beatty directly. Tayamuda let that sit for a moment, then shook his head. That was done for your own reasons. You'd have done it whether Beatty existed or not. That's not sincerity. That's coincidence. Do Kwang's jaw tightened slightly. His father had warned him this wouldn't be easy. He reached into his robe and produced a folded piece of paper. Then this is our sincerity, he said, and held it out. Tayamuda took it. His expression shifted as he read. Only slightly, but enough. Then he looked up with a full, open smile. We have a deal. He'd been right to stay the extra days. These great clans were exactly what they appear to be. Men who'd spent generations learning to profit from any configuration of power, loyal to no one, positioned to gain regardless of who won. Give them something real now, and they'd take the risk. And what Do Kwang had just handed him was considerably more than he'd expected. The private trade arrangements were settled quickly after that, and the 7 men departed under the Honglu officials' guidance. Once outside the compound, the mood in the carriages was lighter, perhaps, than it should have been. "Beatty really are simple," Do Kwang said, leaning back against the carriage wall with something close to satisfaction. "We walked out of there with exactly what we wanted and gave them almost nothing in return." Han Xin laughed. Fan Tong, however, was not laughing. "What exactly did you write on that paper?" He'd had no idea what was in it before Do Kwang handed it over, and the more he thought about it, the less comfortable he was. "Better that you don't know," Do Kwang said. "All of you. The fewer people who know the details, the safer we all are." Fan Tong started to push back, then stopped himself. "What I can tell you," Do Kwang continued, "is that it's a move against King Yin. The Yuan family alone may not be enough to keep him in check. This adds another hand to that game, Beatty's hand. If Beatty and King Yin are grinding against each other, and the Yuan family is making trouble inside Yinzhou at the same time, the pressure on King Yin comes from 3 directions at once. We profit from all of it, because whoever is struggling will need our support." Han Xin and the others held their tongues. The logic was sound enough that asking more questions felt less important than it had a moment ago. The carriages separated at the first major crossing, each family heading back to their own district of the city. Do Kwang went directly to the Prime Minister's residence. A light was still burning in his father's study. He knocked and was told to enter. Do Wei sat behind his desk looking at a page of closely written characters, the expression on his face neutral in the way that meant he was thinking hard about something he didn't intend to show. Do Kwang reported the meeting, Taimuta's agreement to the trade, the routes that had been discussed, the terms they'd settled on. Do Wei listened without interrupting, then nodded slowly. The Ma family's absence from Jinzhou has always been a problem for moving goods through that route. But if this works, Qizhou gives us a cleaner path. The Han family's involvement helps there. We're on the same boat now, which means they won't be tempted to distance themselves from it later. He coughed once, then again, a dry, persistent sound. As for safety, he continued, we trade simultaneously through Qizhou and by sea, not through a single channel. If one route becomes compromised, the other survives. He paused, and his eyes dropped back to the paper on his desk. Come look at this. Do Kwang leaned over his father's shoulder and read. His expression changed after the first few lines. Father, King Yin is establishing schools? A military academy, a government academy, a school of science and technology? He's planning to run his own official selection process. Do Wei said nothing for a moment. If he trains his own officials, Do Kwang said, his voice climbing, he won't need to draw from the pool the great clans control. He'd be cutting the roots out from under our whole system of influence. Do Wei looked at his son steadily. Now you understand why I've been reading this paper for the past hour. What's happening in Yin County and Shanggu County isn't an accident, Do Wei said. That's what this tells me. Do Kwang looked at the paper in his father's hand and felt something cold move through him. Every man raised in a great clan understood, at a bone-deep level, what land meant. Property wasn't just wealth. It was the physical substance of a clan's existence. Without land, there were no tenants. Without tenants, no grain. Without grain, no silver to fund private armies, buy court positions, or endow the next generation with anything worth inheriting. Land was the root. Everything else grew from it. And in Yin County and Shanggu County, King Yin had pulled that root out. Both times, Do Kwang had told himself it was circumstantial, that the wealthy families there had invited their own destruction by raising arms, and that King Yin had simply seized an opportunity that presented itself. He'd found that reading comfortable. Now, looking at the reports from Ping Jun and Liao Juan, he understood it had never been circumstantial at all. King Yin wasn't reacting to rebellions. He was engineering the conditions that would allow him to redistribute land systematically, county by county. The rebellions were the pretext, not the cause. Land is the reverse scale, Dowei said quietly. Touch it, and the reaction is always the same. In the old stories, a dragon had one scale beneath its chin that ran against the grain of all the others. The reverse scale, which if touched would send it into a killing fury no matter how docile it had been a moment before. For the great clans, land was that scale. It didn't matter that Yinzhou was far from Jinling, that none of these counties were theirs. The pattern itself was the threat. If the story of what King Yin was doing in Yinzhou spread, if poor scholars and common people across the Great Song heard that a prince had broken the wealthy family's grip on the land and distributed it to the people who worked it, King Yin would become a figure of legend in the eyes of those people. And the great clans would become the villains of that same story. Power, in a dynasty as old as this one, always rested on two foundations: force and legitimacy. The great clans had always controlled enough of both to sleep soundly. What King Yin was building threatened to shift the second of those, slowly, county by county, without a single battle fought over it. Dowei's eyes went cold in a way Do Kwang recognized. Not hot anger, that passed. This was the other kind. He cannot be allowed to grow any further, Dowei said. Do Kwang nodded slowly. It was right to bring Beatty into this. The Yuan family alone. They've already proven they're not equal to it. He shook his head. What a waste. How they had Yinzhou for a generation and threw it all away. Ma Chong, Dowei said, shifting. How is he these days? Do Kwang allowed himself a thin smile. Very comfortable. Our Silver has made sure of that. He's been in Jinling so long he's practically forgotten what Qinzhou looks like. Ma Chong was Ma Yuan's illegitimate son, Ma Xian's half-brother, born to a concubine who had since died. The quarrel that followed the mother's death had ended with Ma Xian shipping Ma Chong to the capital and effectively cutting him off from any role in Qinzhou's affairs. He'd been drifting in Jinling ever since, living on whatever he could attach himself to. Keep him close, Dowei said. His time will come. The intention was clear enough without spelling it out. If the Ma family could be destabilized from within, if Ma Chong could be positioned as an alternative to Ma Han and Ma Xian when the moment arrived, the coalition that had been quietly resisting the Great Clan's peace faction would lose one of its sturdiest pillars. Ma Yuan's loyalty to King Yin had been a consistent inconvenience. A Ma family occupied with its own succession crisis would have very little energy left for anything else. Yes, father. Do Kwang bowed. Dowei waved him out. As his son's footsteps faded down the corridor, a figure emerged from behind the lacquered screen at the far end of the study. The third prince, Zhao Mu, had been there throughout. Dowei's expression shifted the moment he saw him. The hard political calculation smoothing into something warmer, more personal. Whatever mask he wore for his son, he dropped a layer of it for Zhao Mu. You heard, Dowei said. It wasn't a question. You're moving against King Yin and the Ma family both, Zhao Mu said. His voice was even, carrying the tone of a young man who has been taught since childhood to think in terms of pieces on a board and has made peace with it. Everything I do for your future. Dowei folded his hands. The Yuan family is diminished, which means the second prince has lost his most important backing. His standing at court has suffered for it. The only real threat remaining to your position is the deposed crown prince. If King Yin ever decided to throw his weight behind reinstating him, he'd have the military strength to make it more than just a petition. The emperor might actually listen. He paused. So King Yin must be kept too busy to involve himself in the capital's succession politics, too pressured on his own borders, too occupied with his own survival, to have anything left over for court maneuvering. He glanced northward, as though he could see through the walls of the residence to the provinces beyond. And beyond that, when you eventually sit on the throne, a prince holding 4 counties and 120,000 soldiers will be a different kind of problem entirely. Better to have him half broken now, while the work is easier than to inherit a fully grown power and try to manage it then. Zhao Mu absorbed this. He'd heard versions of it his whole life. His mother, his uncle, each in their own way making the same point. There are no half measures in the competition for a throne. The princes who lost didn't retire to comfortable estates. After Zhao Hong had taken the throne, 4 princes had been quietly given the imperial order to die. 3 others had been exiled and hadn't survived the journey. Only Prince Chun remained, and the court mocked him openly, the emperor having made an example of him in a different way, heaping him with humiliating honorary titles that told everyone exactly what he thought of him. Zhao Mu had no illusions about where second place led. "Thank you, uncle," he said and bowed. Taiamuda and the Beatty delegation departed Jinling the following morning, escorted to the city gates by Honglu temple officials before being released onto the northern road. At the gates, Taiamuda turned in his saddle and looked back at the city. What he saw still startled him. Even now, the sheer scale of it, the density, the accumulated weight of generations of wealth stacked in stone and tile and lacquer. Jinling was genuinely magnificent in a way that the grassland produced nothing to compare against. Its markets never emptied. Its entertainments ran through the night. Its beds were soft in ways that a man raised on felt and horsehide had no adequate frame of reference for. None of it made him want to stay. If anything, the longer he'd spent in Jinling, the more the city had made him restless. All of this wealth, and the people living inside had stopped being able to see it clearly, had stopped feeling the edge that hunger and exposure kept permanently alive on the steppe. The gate guard slouched. The young nobles drank. The emperor haggled with his own court over whether to protect his son. The great clan heirs crept through a back entrance to a foreign guest house in the middle of the night because none of them had the nerve to be seen doing openly what they decided to do anyway. Beatty's strength wasn't its numbers or even its cavalry, though both were formidable. Its strength was that it hadn't yet learned to be comfortable. "When we get back," Taimuda said, loud enough for the men riding with him to hear, "tell everyone who asks what you saw here. Tell them about the food, the wine, the women in the palace gardens. Tell them about the gold on the roof tiles and the silk on every merchant's back. Tell them about the granaries." He let a moment pass, and then tell them that the men guarding all of it were asleep at their posts. His officials laughed, and then they stopped laughing because they could hear in his voice that he meant it as instruction, not entertainment. "Sharpen your blades," he said. "Feed your horses well. It won't be long." He turned north and rode. Yinqing, the north camp. Zhao Su stood watching a craftsman put the final touches on the object taking shape in the center of the training ground. The commander beside him wearing an expression of thorough bewilderment. The past several days had produced something Zhao Su hadn't attempted before in this world. A detailed, large-scale relief map of Yinzhou and the surrounding territory, built up in layers of compacted earth and clay over a wooden frame. Every mountain range and river valley rendered in 3 dimensions at scale. The Yinshan Range rose along the northern edge in ridges the height of a man's fist. The river systems fanned southward. Yingguan sat at the pass where the ranges converged, and the 4 northern counties spread out below it, each with its county seat marked. The commander had been watching its construction with increasing bafflement for days. "Your Highness," he said finally, "how do you know the exact shape of Yinzhou's mountains and rivers down to this level of detail? You've barely left Yinqing since you arrived here." "I read it in a book," Zhao Su said. The commander absorbed this with the expression of a man who has long since stopped being surprised by King Yan's answers and has simply decided to accept them. "What is it called?" he asked instead. "And what's it for?" Zhao Su looked at the map. The mountain passes, the river crossings, the road networks laid in thin lines of pressed clay between the county seats. From above, the entire defensive and administrative reality of the 4 northern counties was visible at once, in a way that no flat paper map could convey. A commander who could read this map wouldn't be imagining terrain. He'd be seeing it. "It's called a terrain model," Zhao Su said. "And what it's for, I'll show you." He picked up a short wooden pointer and began. "This is called a sand table," Zhao Su said. "From now on, every army in the royal forces will have someone responsible for maintaining one. The purpose is exactly what it looks like, to rehearse battles on terrain before they happen, so that when the real moment comes, no one is encountering the ground for the first time. Every general in this army needs to be able to read one and work from one." The commander looked at the model with new eyes, turning the explanation over in his mind. He'd been watching it take shape for days without fully understanding what he was looking at. Now, the function snapped into place, and with it, the particular kind of respect he always felt when King Yin showed him something he'd never thought to want until he understood it. In the battle against the Yuan family and Beatty, neither he nor any other general in the royal army had questioned King Yan's ability to lead them. Before that campaign, King Yin had been their prince. After it, he was something else, not just a commander who'd won, but the kind of commander whose presence made every man around him feel that the right decisions were being made. That authority didn't rest on rank or blood. It rested on evidence, accumulated battle by battle. So when King Yin said a sand table was useful, the commander accepted it, even if he couldn't yet fully picture how. "What's the state of the recruitment?" Zhao Su asked, settling into the chair beside the table. The question carried real weight behind it. With Shiliang absorbed into Beatty's orbit and Beatty's forces running harassment raids along the border almost daily, testing the Great Song's response, keeping the pressure applied, getting the Royal Army to its full authorized strength of 120,000 had become urgent. The border environment wasn't going to ease on its own, and Zhao Hong had now made plain that he wasn't a reliable source of external support. Whatever Zhao Su had, he'd need to build himself. The chaos of the recent months left a lot of people displaced, the commander said. Among the young and able-bodied who've ended up in the northern counties without land or work, recruitment has gone quickly. We're halfway to the 60,000 recruits authorized, and at current pace, the full number should be reached within half a month. Zhao Su nodded. 3 taels of silver a month, food and board provided, a uniform and a weapon. For men with nothing, it was genuinely attractive. The recruits weren't coming out of patriotism, or not primarily. They were coming because the Royal Army was the best offer available. That was fine. Men who ate well and were treated fairly developed loyalty of their own kind over time. The problem, the commander continued, keeping his eyes on the sand table, is that we have too many bodies and not enough equipment. Military uniforms, armor, weapons. The Armaments Bureau can't produce fast enough to outfit the new recruits at this rate. This was a pointed remark, delivered with just enough diplomatic distance to avoid being a direct complaint. Zhao Su took it as what it was, a request to push Wang Ying harder. He understood the underlying problem without needing it spelled out. The Armaments Bureau had been scaled to meet the needs of a smaller force and a narrower mission. Outfitting 120,000 soldiers, simultaneously maintaining existing equipment, producing the next cannon run for the capital, and developing the flintlock mechanism, was a fundamentally different scale of demand. The Bureau needed to expand, and the other production workshops alongside it needed to be formalized into something more systematic rather than the improvised arrangement that had grown organically over the past year. "I'll speak to Wang Ying," Zhao Su said. The commander felt the relief of it immediately. Wang Ying, whatever his many virtues, had a particular talent for looking the commander in the eye and saying no with complete serenity. "The first military academy intake, have you selected them?" Zhao Su asked. The commander's expression shifted into something between amusement and lingering astonishment. "When word got out that Your Highness would be lecturing personally, the generals practically came to blows over the places. I had to run a lottery in the end. 300 selected." Zhao Su allowed himself a quiet satisfaction at that. The 3 schools weren't a side project. They were the structural foundation of everything he intended to build. The knowledge in his head was extensive, but one man's capacity was finite. Teaching it meant multiplication. 300 commanders who understood artillery positioning on varied terrain were worth more than one Zhao Su who understood it. 100 officials who knew how to actually administer a granary or manage a land survey were worth more than Lu Fu working alone. A generation of craftsmen who understood why their processes worked, not just how to execute the steps, could push the Armaments Bureau's capabilities further than he could push them himself. "One more thing," Zhao Su said. "I'm sending 500 scholars into the army." The commander went very still. 500 scholars, he repeated. His voice had the careful flatness of a man, making sure he'd heard correctly before he said something he might regret. Zhao Su had expected this. The tension between civil and military in the Great Song ran deep and had been running for generations. Literary officials who held the pen and enjoyed the salary, military men who held the sword and did the bleeding, and a mutual contempt between them that had calcified into something close to institutional. Military men distrusted civil officials as meddlers and parasites. Civil officials regarded military men as blunt instruments to be directed from a safe distance. But what Zhao Su intended wasn't a version of that arrangement. He was thinking about something specific and less obvious: political officers. Not officers who commanded soldiers in battle, but men embedded in units whose function was to ensure the army's loyalty ran to the institution, to King Yin and the principles of the royal army, rather than to individual commanders who might, over time, develop private ambitions of their own. He hadn't forgotten the incident before the Battle of Autumn Hunting, when certain generals had quietly moved to turn their own men against him. The commander had caught it and suppressed it. But the royal army was about to be 120,000 strong, with units stationed across the 4 northern counties and at Yingguan, far enough apart that he couldn't rely on personal presence to hold everything together. In a large enough force, deployed across enough distance, a commander of sufficient ambition could, given time, turn his assigned soldiers into something that answered to him rather than to the chain of command. History had examples of exactly that failure. The scholars he intended to send into the army weren't there to advise on tactics or compete with military commanders for authority over soldiers' movements. They were there to teach reading, writing, basic arithmetic, the history of the Royal Army's campaigns, and through that teaching, to build a relationship between enlisted men and something larger than their immediate chain of command. Educated soldiers who understood what they were part of were harder to manipulate into private mutiny than men who knew nothing beyond their sergeant's face and their company's campfire. They won't compete for command of the soldiers, Zhao Su said. Their role is education. When they've passed the school examinations, they'll be assigned to units and they'll teach. That's all. Tell the generals to put away their suspicions. The commander wrestled with this visibly, then gave up and accepted it, the same way he always eventually accepted King Yan's decisions that he couldn't immediately understand. He pressed his fist to his chest and shouted his acknowledgement with enough volume to rattle the nearby craftsman. Zhao Su rubbed his ear and gave him a look. After a few more practical matters, he left the north camp and made his way toward the administrative offices. As he walked, he turned the armaments bureau problem over in his mind. The expansion couldn't wait, but expanding properly meant more than adding workers and floor space. It meant formalizing the whole production chain: raw material sourcing, quality standards at each stage, finished goods inspection, inventory tracking. The improvised energy of the Bureau's early days had served well enough when the mission was narrow. It wouldn't serve now. He was still working through the logistics when he turned into the Bureau's rear courtyard and nearly walked into a cloud of frustration. Wang Chong was crouched beside a workbench, both hands pressed against his temples, staring at a piece of spring steel on the floor as though he could change what it was through sustained resentment. He didn't notice Zhao Su in the doorway. "Why won't it work?" he muttered. "Why won't it work?" Wang Ying's voice came in from just behind him, dry and not particularly sympathetic. "Maybe because your three-legged cat technique isn't quite up to the standard you think it is." Wang Chong's expression collapsed further. "If I go ask His Highness, he'll laugh at me." Wang Ying was quiet for a moment, and then something shifted in his voice that Zhao Su, still in the doorway unnoticed, hadn't heard from the older man very often. "I'll tell you something," Wang Ying said. "When I was learning to fire porcelain from your grandfather, I failed more than 100 times before I got a single piece right. 100 times. And in the end, it wasn't my own cleverness that figured it out. I went to an old potter who'd been doing it his whole life, and he told me one thing that changed everything. One thing freely given." He paused. "Being afraid to fail is one thing. Being afraid to ask because you're afraid to look foolish, that's the problem that actually stops you." Wang Chong sat with that for a moment. Then he got up off the floor, picked up the spring steel, set it on the bench, and turned toward the door, and found Zhao Su already standing there, looking at him with an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite not one. Wang Chang's ears went red. "Your Highness," he said, "I was just about to come find you." "I heard," Zhao Su said,